Lonesome Dove is an epic ballad of friendship and sacrifice. But beyond the screen, its cast faced tragedies no one expected. Some fell to illness, others endured loneliness until their final days, and some saw their marriages collapse in pain. Why did these beloved stars meet such tragic ends? Today, the heartbreaking truth will be revealed. Glenn Hedley as Elmira Boot Johnson. At 34 years old, Glenn Hedley appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Elmira Boot Johnson, a selfish woman who abandoned everything to chase the wild life she craved. On screen, Elmira was the embodiment of poor choices and the price they bring, and bitterly, Glenn Hedley's real life carried wounds just as deep. Glenn Amy Hedley was born on March 13, 1955 in New London, Connecticut. She once had a marriage that seemed like a fairy tale with actor John Malkovich. But that love story shattered when Malkovich had an affair with Michelle Pfeiffer during the filming of Dangerous Liaisons, 1988. That very public betrayal became both a humiliation and a wound Glenn carried for the rest of her life. She was a private woman who never exposed her pain to the public, but those close to her recalled how the shock broke her down, leaving her to endure years of torment and loneliness. After the divorce, Glenn rebuilt a home with her second husband, Byron McCulloch, and gave birth to her son, Sterling. But the crack in her heart from her first marriage never healed. It was the darkness she hid behind her gentle smile on stage, a wound that made audiences feel even more compassion when looking back on her life. And then, once again, fate was cruel. On June 8, 2017, Glenn Hedley passed away suddenly in Santa Monica, California, from complications of a pulmonary embolism. She was 62 years old. Her net worth was estimated at around $5 million, much of it earned from her unforgettable roles in films like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Mr. Holland's Opus. Robert Urick as Jake Spoon. When Robert Urick was 43 years old, he brought to life the character of Jake Spoon in the television masterpiece Lonesome Dove, 1989. Jake was a former Texas Ranger who slid deeper and deeper into poor choices, paying for them with his very life. The role became a haunting metaphor for Urick's own real-life struggles. Robert Michael Urick was born on December 19, 1946, in Toronto, Ohio. He once had what seemed like a perfect love with his wife, Heather Menzies, the actress from The Sound of Music. But fate was merciless and denied them a peaceful life. In 1996, when his career was at its peak, Urick was diagnosed with synovial sarcoma, a rare and brutal cancer. He carried the weight of being a husband, a father, and a man enduring endless rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, and surgeries, all while suffering searing pain. The strong man once seen on screen was now fighting an invisible enemy inside his own body. In the end, on April 16, 2002, the cruel disease took Robert Urick's life at just 55 years old. His net worth was estimated at around $10 million, but far more valuable was the image he left behind of an artist who never gave up. At his farewell, beside a flower-covered casket, people would never forget the gaze of Heather and their children, eyes full of love, family, and resilience in the middle of despair. Frederick Forest as Blue Duck. When Frederick Forest was 53 years old, he appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Blue Duck, a notorious outlaw who spread terror and became a true demon of the Wild West. That brutal character made audiences shudder, and it also unintentionally reflected the dark corners and inner turmoil of Forest's own life, where personal tragedies clung to him relentlessly. Frederick Fenimore Forest Jr. was born on December 23, 1936, in Waxahachie, Texas. He grew up in an ordinary family, but carried an intense passion for art. Behind the screen, however, his life was marked by broken marriages. His first wife, Nancy Ann Whitaker, left him after only 3 years of marriage. In 1980, he married actress Marilu Henner, believing he had found true happiness. But just 3 years later, that love also crumbled. One heartbreak after another left Forest in long stretches of loneliness. Alongside his fractured personal life, his career also fell into darkness. From an Academy Award nomination for The Rose, 1979, he then faced the devastating failure of One from the Heart, 1982, which dragged him into decline and left him forgotten by Hollywood. Failed marriages and faded fame became the burdens that sank him into depression and an unspoken sorrow. On June 23, 2023, Frederick Forest passed away in Santa Monica after a long battle with illness at the age of 86. He left behind a net worth of about $3 million, but his greatest legacy was not in numbers. It was in the grief of fans who once cherished him. Upon hearing the news, Bette Midler, his co-star in The Rose, wrote a farewell. "He was a remarkable human being and a rare talent. I was lucky to have him in my life." That final tribute was like the last note, closing the elegy of a once brilliant actor. Frederick Coffin as Big Zwei. When Frederick Coffin was 46 years old, he appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Big Zwei, a rough but sincere man who embodied the hard lives of the Western frontier. Though only a supporting role, his character left a strong impression, because the quietness and shadow behind him seemed to mirror Coffin's own real life, a journey full of tragedy. Frederick Coffin was born on January 16, 1943, in Detroit, Michigan, and carried a burden he could never escape: lung cancer. Addicted to cigarettes from a very young age, Coffin once thought the habit harmless, but over time it silently destroyed his body. The cruel disease shortened his breath, weakened his strength, and robbed him of the chance to reach the leading roles his talent deserved. Each day on set, he acted while enduring relentless coughing fits and unending exhaustion. On July 31, 2003, Frederick Coffin died in Los Angeles from lung cancer at the age of 60. His net worth was estimated at about $2 million, earned mostly through steady supporting roles in Wayne's World, Hard to Kill, and countless television series. Yet the greatest value he left behind was not measured in money, but in the tragic image of a quiet talent who gave his all until his very last breath. Timothy Scott as P.I. Parker. At 52 years old, Timothy Scott joined Lonesome Dove, 1989, as P.I. Parker, the loyal but awkward friend of Gus and Call. His character brought rare kindness into a world full of violence, and bitterly, Scott himself, often cast in quiet supporting roles, also endured a life of tragedy, silence, and loss. Timothy Scott was born on July 20, 1937, in Detroit, Michigan, and grew up in a working-class family before moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico. He turned to the stage early, so passionate about acting that he co-founded the New Met Theater in Los Angeles with his close friend James Gammon. Yet away from the lights, his personal life was overshadowed by darkness. Scott was a heavy smoker from his youth, a habit that planted the seeds of the lung cancer that would later claim his life and contributed to the breakdown of his marriage. His first marriage ended in divorce, leaving him with 2 sons and a void that was hard to fill. Even after remarrying, he carried loneliness and the sense of always being an outsider in Hollywood. His career was unstable, his health deteriorated, and his personal life fractured, leaving him to live mostly in obscurity, only to gain belated recognition through Lonesome Dove. On June 14, 1995, Timothy Scott died in Los Angeles from lung cancer at the age of 57. He left a net worth of about $1 million, earned largely from supporting roles in more than 50 films and television series. The final image that remained with audiences was his thin frame, weathered face, and sincere presence, like a wandering soul forever etched into the Western screen. Jorge Martinez de Hoyos as Po Campo. At 69 years old, Jorge Martinez de Hoyos appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Po Campo, the eccentric but charming cook who brought a touch of humanity to the blood-soaked journey of the cowboys. Though it was only a supporting role, his character stood out, just like Jorge's entire career, one built on tireless dedication, quiet achievements, and lingering tragedy. Jorge Martinez de Hoyos was born on September 25, 1920, in Mexico City, Mexico, and in his later years he carried the heavy burden of illness. He had been a smoker since youth, a habit that seemed harmless at first, but eventually planted the seeds of the deadly lung cancer that consumed him. The disease not only tortured his body, but also drained his spirit, turning each breath into a battle. In Hollywood, Jorge also had to confront discrimination and cultural barriers as a Mexican actor stepping into international cinema, forcing him to fight professional pressures while also enduring the worsening pain inside his body. In his final months under the stage lights, he still tried to hide his decline so audiences would see only a dedicated artist, yet inside, he was a man suffering, lonely in his last fight with fate. On May 6, 1997, Jorge Martinez de Hoyos died in his hometown of Mexico City from lung cancer, closing his life at the age of 76. His net worth was estimated at around $1.5 million, accumulated from more than 100 roles across Mexican cinema and Hollywood. The most tragic image was that he passed away in the very city where he was born, as if he had never escaped the cycle of destiny. Robert Donley, as Old Sam. At 78 years old, Robert Donley appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Old Sam, a weathered old man who spoke little but whose eyes carried the weight of a lifetime of hardship. Though only a supporting role, his presence added a layer of melancholy to the film, as if a real fragment of life had been placed into the bloody and tear-filled Western world. Robert Phillips Donley was born on November 26, 1911, in Carmichaels, Pennsylvania, and carried within him a tragedy few could imagine. In 1934, he married Catherine Ellen McMullen, and together they had a young son, James Patrick Donley. But happiness was shattered by horror. On November 7, 1945, at the William Penn Hotel in Pittsburgh, Catherine, in a fit of mental illness, threw the child from the 12th floor before leaping to her own death. Both wife and child perished on the same day, leaving Robert alone with a grief that could never be repaired. He continued living, entering new marriages and having more children, but the memory of that heartbreaking loss never left him. It became a ghost that haunted his life, cloaking it in mourning, and his eyes always seemed to carry unspoken sorrow. On January 20th, 2004, Robert Donley died in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, at the age of 92. His net worth at death was only about $500,000, saved from late supporting roles in Cocktail, The Rockford Files, and Lonesome Dove. The final image he left behind was that of an elderly, quiet actor who carried in his heart an irreparable loss, a testament to a long life weighed down by tragedy, with a wound from 1945 that never truly healed. Gavin O'Hurlehey as Dan Suggs. When Gavin O'Hurlehey was 38 years old, he appeared in Return to Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Dan Suggs, a vicious villain who spread terror across the Western Plains. That cruel character not only made audiences shudder, but also evoked the darkness in O'Hurlehey's own life, a talent pushed to the margins of Hollywood, struggling to survive in a harsh entertainment world. Gavin John O'Hurlehey was born on July 29, 1951, in Dublin, Ireland. He carried both ambition and suffering. He married Juliet and had 4 children, seemingly finding a safe harbor of peace. But his career left him with a wound that never healed. His role as Chuck Cunningham, the eldest son in Happy Days, was abruptly erased by the writers after just 1 season. From a promising face, Gavin suddenly became tied to the phrase, the Chuck Cunningham syndrome, Hollywood's way of describing when a character is written off as if they never existed. That shock haunted him for years, forcing him into mostly villain roles and leaving him bitter, remembered not for his talent but for an intentional erasure. Outwardly, he was a tall, cold presence on screen. Inwardly, he was a lonely man, carrying the shame of his profession while struggling to provide for his family. On September 15, 2021, Gavin O'Hurlehey died in Bath, England, at the age of 70. The cause of death was never revealed. His net worth was estimated at around $2.5 million, largely from roles in Willow, Never Say Never Again, and British television, where he managed to reclaim a measure of light in his final years. The most tragic image was that of a talented actor forgotten by Hollywood, whose true worth was only mourned when he was gone. A man once erased from screen memory. Matthew Cowles as Monkey John. At 45 years old, Matthew Cowles appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Monkey John, a rebellious and wild cowboy embodying the spirit of outcasts on the frontier. Though not a central character, his defiant gaze and edgy performance made Monkey John an unforgettable piece in the brutal Western tapestry. Matthew Chandler Cowles was born on September 28, 1944, in New York City, into a family rich in artistic tradition. Yet his life was soon consumed by reckless habits. In his youth, Cowles embraced a bohemian lifestyle of indulgence, addiction, and carefree adventures. In 1980, he nearly lost his life in a serious motorcycle accident, a turning point that left his health permanently weakened. The excesses of his younger years left deep scars, contributing to the heart condition that eventually took his life. Though he found stability with his second wife, actress Christine Baranski, and their 2 daughters, Cowles lived in a body worn down by past choices, carrying painful consequences from a rebellious youth. The physical suffering, combined with the sense of being an outsider in a prestigious family, shaped a life that shone brightly on stage but was filled with quiet anguish behind the scenes. On May 22, 2014, Matthew Cowles died in New York from congestive heart failure at the age of 69. His net worth was estimated at around $2 million, much of it earned from his television career, particularly his role as Billy Clyde Tuggle in All My Children. The final image he left with audiences was that of a free-spirited artist who lived life to the fullest but departed quietly, leaving behind sorrow for his family. Michael Tylo as D. Boot. When Michael Tylo was 41 years old, he appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as D. Boot, a young town lawyer with an intellectual and principled demeanor amid the chaos of the Western frontier. Although the role had little screen time, Tylo's presence still left an impression with his stern aura, one that made him a familiar face in many soap operas throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Michael Edward Tylo was born on October 16, 1948, in Detroit, Michigan, and endured family tragedies that cast a dark shadow over his life. He married 3 times, but his longest marriage to actress Hunter Tylo brought the deepest heartbreak. Together they had children, but in 2007, their son Michael Mickey Tylo Jr. drowned at only 19 years old. The sudden loss of his son pushed Michael into deep depression, tearing his soul apart. Though he tried to continue his work teaching at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, he never recovered from the grief. Previous divorces had already left gaps in his personal life, and Mickey's death turned those gaps into a bottomless void, leaving him haunted by sorrow for the rest of his days. On September 28, 2021, Michael Tylo died in Henderson, Nevada, at the age of 72. His net worth was estimated at around $3 million, earned mostly from his decades-long soap opera career in Guiding Light and The Young and the Restless. But the greatest value he left behind was not his wealth, but the memory of a talented man with a bleeding heart. The image that audiences can never forget, a father who lost his son, carrying unbearable grief into his final years, before quietly departing this world. A tragedy that lasted until his very last breath. Robert Duval as Augustus Gus McCrae. When Robert Duval was 58 years old, he stunned the film world with his performance as Augustus Gus McCrae in Lonesome Dove, 1989. The character of Gus, humorous, generous, yet deeply tragic, became iconic, elevating the miniseries to legendary status and engraving Duval's name as one of the greatest actors of the century. Robert Selden Duval was born on January 5, 1931, in San Diego, California, and he carried his own private sorrows in marriage. He went through 3 failed marriages, each of them once seeming like a final haven, but ending instead in loneliness and fracture. After every divorce, Duval returned to an empty room, facing silences heavier than the most grueling scenes he had ever filmed. With no children to share his life with, he often admitted to feelings of isolation, as though his glorious career could never fill the void in his heart. It was only when he met Luciana Pedraza, his wife decades younger, that he finally found peace. Still, the scars from his past loves remained etched into him, shaping his life into a melody at once brilliant and sorrowful. Today, at 94 years old, Robert Duval lives quietly on his Virginia ranch, keeping up his passion for tango dancing, a pastime that has preserved both his health and joy in old age. He occasionally appears in small projects, but most of his time is devoted to family and art. His net worth is estimated at around $70 million, the result of dozens of unforgettable roles from The Godfather to Apocalypse Now. The lasting image is of an old artist, broken many times by love, yet still walking proudly forward, leaving audiences not only a cinematic legacy, but also a testament of resilience in the face of life's wounds. Tommy Lee Jones as Woodrow F. Call. At 43 years old, Tommy Lee Jones embodied Woodrow F. Call in Lonesome Dove, 1989. His portrayal of the tough, principled Texas Ranger, haunted by loneliness, became one of his career-defining performances. With a rugged face and a commanding voice, Jones turned Call into a modern Western icon, the perfect counterbalance to Robert Duval's Gus McCrae. Tommy Lee Jones was born on September 15, 1946, in San Saba, Texas. His childhood was scarred with hardship. His father was an oil field worker. His mother worked various jobs from police officer to beauty shop owner, but their marriage fractured and ultimately collapsed. The boy grew up amidst 2 divorces, watching a family fall apart, leaving behind an indelible sadness. Carrying Cherokee ancestry, Jones grew up in a harsh land where he learned to survive as an outsider, quiet, strong, and always guarded, a shell built to hide the wounds of an affection-starved childhood. In Hollywood, Jones's career burned bright, but was often overshadowed by his fiery and difficult personality. He frequently clashed with co-stars, fought with directors, and was branded hard to work with. In his personal life, emotional fractures cut deeper still. 2 divorces left him in recurring solitude. Behind the glare of Oscars and blockbusters worth hundreds of millions, there was a Tommy Lee Jones withdrawing into silence, finding escape only in fields and stables, where he felt least judged. Now, at 78 years old, Jones lives on his sprawling 3,000-acre Texas ranch, raising horses and devoting himself to polo, the one passion that keeps him sharp. He still occasionally accepts roles, but has mostly stepped away from Hollywood's noise. His net worth is estimated at around $90 million, earned from The Fugitive, Men in Black, No Country for Old Men, and dozens of defining performances. His enduring image is not one of luxury, but of an old man on horseback, silently watching the sunset. Danny Glover as Joshua Dietz. At 43 years old, Danny Glover took on the role of Joshua Dietz in Lonesome Dove, 1989. A devoted companion, loyal until his final breath, Dietz's tragic death made audiences weep. The character brought a unique layer of depth to the miniseries and made Glover an indispensable part of this television masterpiece. Danny LeBurn Glover was born on July 22, 1946, in San Francisco, California. From early childhood, he faced an invisible enemy: epilepsy. Sudden seizures struck without warning, turning his youth into a series of fearful days, haunted by the thought that he could collapse at any moment. Friends distanced themselves, society looked down on him, and Glover himself was left uncertain about his future. Raised in a working-class family, he carried an isolated, self-conscious childhood shaped by the pain of illness. When he entered acting, Glover not only fought to prove his talent, but also to break the racial barriers of Hollywood. He was often denied roles or typecast into poor and marginalized characters. Personal pain deepened further when his seemingly stable marriage to Asake Bomani ended in divorce, leaving him with a void that was hard to fill. Behind the success of Lethal Weapon and The Color Purple was a man full of wounds, both physical and emotional, a man who seemed strong on the outside but quietly carried enduring sorrow within. Today, Danny Glover is 78 years old. He lives more simply, devoting his time to human rights and social justice work, turning his life story into a source of strength for the marginalized. His net worth is estimated at around $40 million. Mostly from the Lethal Weapon franchise and hundreds of roles across film and television. Diane Lane as Lorena Wood. When Diane Lane was 24 years old, she appeared in Lonesome Dove, 1989, as Lorena Wood, a prostitute caught up in a journey filled with blood and heartbreak. Her character was fragile, yet desperate for love, becoming one of the story's most tragic highlights. This role transformed Diane Lane from a young starlet into a name that all of Hollywood had to pay attention to. Diane Lane was born on January 22, 1965, in New York City, but her childhood was far from peaceful. When she was just 13 days old, her parents divorced. Her mother left, abandoning the baby girl to the care of her father, a taxi driver. Diane grew up in shabby rented rooms, traveling the city at her father's side, tasting instability and loneliness before she even understood what childhood was meant to be. The loss of her mother left deep scars, shaping her into an independent child carrying hidden wounds. Lane's career exploded early with A Little Romance, 1979, where Laurence Olivier even called her the new Grace Kelly. But the spotlight faded quickly when big productions like Streets of Fire and The Cotton Club failed at the box office. From a child prodigy of the screen, she plummeted into obscurity, at one point quitting acting altogether and moving back in with the mother she had once resented. Her comeback in Lonesome Dove was therefore more than just a role. It was proof of her resilience in rising after failure. Now, at 60 years old, 2025, Diane Lane continues to endure in Hollywood's unforgiving world. After painful divorces and countless tearful roles, she found strength again in films like Unfaithful and Under the Tuscan Sun. Her net worth is estimated at around $40 million, but her true value lies in her ability to overcome loss, from a childhood of darkness to a woman who dared to stand tall and keep moving forward. These tragedies reveal that behind the legend of Lonesome Dove were lives marked by pain no less heartbreaking than what was shown on screen. Were you surprised by the fate of these stars? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so we can uncover more hidden stories together.